The massive orbital station hung in space, like a silver jewel, above the purple and green surface of the Velrani homeworld. Inside its docking bay, the human vessel Horizon's Gate sat quietly, connected by 3 sealed corridors to the main diplomatic wing. The station was enormous, built by the Velrani to accommodate ships from dozens of different species. But today, almost all of its attention was focused on one thing: the treaty between humanity and the Velrani Empire. Lieutenant Commander Danny Wright stood in the observation deck, looking down at the planet below. He had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. While the other members of the human delegation studied trade routes and military protocols, Danny had buried himself in Velrani culture. He learned their clicking language, studied their social structures, and read everything he could find about their biology. The Velrani were insectoid, with hard exoskeletons that gleamed in shades of purple and black. They had compound eyes that could see in spectrums humans couldn't imagine. Most humans found them unsettling to look at. Danny found them fascinating. Behind him, the door slid open. Captain Lisa Morgan entered, her uniform crisp and her expression serious as always. She was the commanding officer of the Horizon's Gate, a veteran of 20 years in the diplomatic corps. She ran her ship with precision and expected nothing less from her crew. "Danny, we need you in the conference room," she said. "Queen Thesara wants to introduce her daughters before the evening ceremony." Danny turned from the window and nodded. This was unusual. The Velrani queen had 3 juvenile daughters, but they were rarely seen in public. The fact that she wanted to present them to the human delegation was a sign of trust. It meant the negotiations were going well. He followed Captain Morgan through the curved corridors of the station. The walls were made of some smooth material that changed color slightly as they passed, responding to their body heat. Velrani architecture was like that, organic and responsive. It made some of the human crew uncomfortable, but Danny appreciated the thoughtfulness behind it. They entered the main conference room, where Chief Diplomat Paul Carson was already waiting. Paul was a tall man with gray hair and a calm smile that never quite reached his eyes. He had negotiated treaties with 17 different species and considered himself an expert in alien relations. He nodded at Danny, but didn't speak. The far door opened, and Queen Thesara entered. She was magnificent and terrifying all at once. Nearly 7 feet tall, her exoskeleton was the deep purple black of royalty, and her compound eyes glittered like cut gemstones. Her antennae moved constantly, reading the air currents and chemical signals in the room. Behind her came her 3 daughters. The young princesses were much smaller than their mother, each about the size of a large dog. Their exoskeletons were still soft and translucent, showing the lighter tissues beneath. Their wings were just beginning to develop, small and delicate against their backs. They moved with the jerky curiosity of children everywhere, looking at everything, clicking softly to each other in their own private language. Captain Morgan, Chief Diplomat Carson, Lieutenant Commander Wright. Queen Thesara's voice had a harmonic quality, as if several tones were speaking at once. "May I present my daughters, Hera, the eldest, Messa, the middle, and Talus, the youngest." The 3 princesses performed a formal Velrani greeting, touching their antennae to their thoraxes in sequence. Danny responded correctly, having practiced the gesture hundreds of times. He noticed Captain Morgan hesitate slightly before copying him. Paul Carson did his best, but got the order wrong. The Queen noticed, but said nothing. "They are beautiful, Your Majesty," Danny said in careful Velrani. The Queen's antenna straightened in surprise. "You speak our language," she observed. "Poorly, Your Majesty, but I am trying to learn." Something shifted in the Queen's posture. That is more than most species attempt, she said. You honor us with the effort. The meeting was brief. The princesses would attend the evening ceremony, which would be followed by a formal rest period. Then, the next morning, the final treaty would be signed. Everything was proceeding perfectly. That evening, the ceremony was elaborate and long. The humans stood in their dress uniforms, while Velrani officials performed ritual exchanges of minerals and plant materials, each one symbolizing different aspects of the proposed alliance. The princesses sat on small platforms near their mother, and Danny could see them growing restless as the hours passed. Young Velrani, he had read, needed frequent rest periods. Their developing nervous systems couldn't handle prolonged stimulation. Finally, the ceremony ended. The Velrani retired to their quarters. The humans returned to their section of the station. Danny went to his small cabin, changed out of his uniform, and began reviewing his notes for the treaty signing. He wanted to make sure he understood every biological and cultural reference that might come up. He had been reading for about an hour when the alarm sounded. It wasn't the harsh emergency klaxon he had trained for. This was different. A rising and falling tone that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. Danny grabbed his communicator and called the bridge. Right here, what's happening? Captain Morgan's voice came back tense and clipped. Station-wide alert. The Velrani princesses are missing. All human personnel are to remain in their quarters until further notice. We're cooperating fully with their security forces. Danny's stomach dropped. Missing? How could they be missing? The royal quarters had guards. There were protocols. Through his door he could hear heavy footsteps in the corridor outside. Velrani guards moving fast. Their language was rapid and angry, a clicking and chittering that even Danny couldn't follow. He heard human voices too, Captain Morgan and Paul Carson, trying to calm the situation. His communicator buzzed again. This time it was Paul Carson. Danny, we need you in the conference room, now. Queen Thesara wants to speak with someone who understands Velrani biology. Danny pulled his uniform back on and stepped into the corridor. 2 Velrani guards were waiting, their armored bodies blocking most of the hallway. They were soldiers, he could tell from their markings. Their compound eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. Lieutenant Commander Wright, one of them said in heavily accented English, come with us. They escorted him through the station at a pace that was almost a run. Other human crew members watched from their doorways, confused and worried. This wasn't how diplomatic missions were supposed to go. In the conference room, Queen Thesara stood in the center of a circle of advisors and guards. Her antennae were rigid with stress, and her mandibles clicked in sharp, angry patterns. When Danny entered, every Velrani eye turned toward him. Your Majesty, he said, executing a perfect formal bow. My daughters are gone, the Queen said, and for the first time, Danny heard real emotion in her harmonic voice. Not just anger, but fear. They were in their rest chambers under guard. Now the chambers are empty, and there is no sign of forced entry. No trace of where they went. Commander Vexthal, the head of the Royal Guard, stepped forward. He was massive, even for a Velrani, with scars across his exoskeleton that spoke of many battles. The human section is closest to the royal quarters, he said. We must search there. My people had nothing to do with this, Captain Morgan said firmly. Then you will not object to a thorough search, Vexthal replied. The room erupted in argument, Velrani clicking against human voices. Danny stood quietly, thinking. Young Velrani needed warmth when stressed. They sought dark, enclosed spaces. They were small enough to fit into spaces adults couldn't. And this station had ventilation ducts running everywhere, connecting all the sections. Your Majesty, Danny said loudly, cutting through the argument. Permission to speak. The room fell silent. Queen Thesara gestured for him to continue. The princesses are in their juvenile stage. If they were frightened or overwhelmed, they might have sought refuge. They could be anywhere in the station's ventilation system. Vexthal made a dismissive sound. They know better than to leave their chambers. They're children, Danny said gently. Sometimes children hide when they're scared, even when they know they shouldn't. Queen Thessera's antennae quivered. You think they ran away? I think they might have needed quiet and warmth after the long ceremony. I think they might be hiding somewhere they feel safe. The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. We search everywhere. Every ventilation shaft, every access panel, every space large enough for a juvenile Velrani. We search the human section too, but we search the entire station. The search began immediately. Danny volunteered to help check the human quarters, hoping his knowledge of Velrani biology might give him an edge. But, as the hours stretched on, with no sign of the princesses, he felt his hope fading. The treaty was forgotten. The alliance hung by a thread, and 3 frightened children were somewhere in the vast station, alone in the dark. The search had been going on for 4 hours, and the station felt like it was holding its breath. Every corridor echoed with footsteps, as teams of Velrani guards and human crew members checked every possible hiding place. Danny had joined a search team led by Kate Phillips, the Horizons Gates medical officer. She was a practical woman, with short brown hair and steady hands. Exactly the kind of person you wanted in a crisis. They had checked storage rooms, maintenance closures, and empty crew quarters. Kate carried a thermal scanner, while Danny used his tablet to cross-reference Velrani juvenile behavior patterns. Every vent they opened was empty. Every dark corner held nothing but shadows. This is impossible, Kate muttered as they finished searching another section. How can 3 children just vanish? The station's environmental systems were set to Velrani comfort levels, which meant it was warmer and more humid than humans preferred. They're small and they're scared. They could be anywhere. His communicator buzzed. It was Captain Morgan. All teams, report to your stations. We're expanding the search grid to include the docking mechanisms and the external maintenance corridors. Kate looked worried. Those areas aren't pressurized for Velrani juveniles. If they went out there... She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it would mean. In the main conference room, the mood had grown darker. Commander Vexthal stood with his arms crossed, his compound eyes fixed on the human delegation. Several Velrani advisors were speaking in low, urgent clicks. Danny caught enough of the conversation to understand they were suggesting the humans be detained for questioning. Queen Thessera sat on a platform designed for her species, her posture rigid with barely controlled emotion. Her antennae moved slowly, processing information and stress chemicals in the air. She looked exhausted and frightened, and seeing such a powerful being reduced to this made Danny's heart ache. Your Majesty, Paul Carson was saying, his diplomatic voice smooth but strained. I give you my word as Earth's representative that our people had nothing to do with your daughter's disappearance. We want to find them as much as you do. Words are air, Vexthal growled. The treaty can wait. Find the princesses, or this alliance dies here. Captain Morgan stepped forward. We will submit to any security measures you deem necessary. All human personnel will remain under observation. We will open every system, every database, everything we have. It was a huge concession, essentially placing the entire human delegation under suspicion. But it was also smart. It showed cooperation and good faith at a moment when both were desperately needed. Queen Thessara raised one clawed hand for silence. Continue the search, she commanded. I want every cubic meter of this station examined. My daughters are here somewhere. Find them. Danny left the conference room with permission to continue searching. He had a theory he wanted to test. Young Velrani were attracted to warmth, especially when stressed. The station's environmental systems varied by section. The Velrani quarters were kept at their preferred temperature, But what about other areas? What if the princesses had been drawn to a section that happened to be warmer than normal? He pulled up the station's environmental map on his tablet. Most human quarters were set to standard temperature, but individuals could adjust their own cabins within certain limits. Danny had adjusted his quarters weeks ago, raising the temperature and humidity to match what he had read about Velrani preferences. He had done it as part of his cultural study, trying to understand how environmental factors affected their society. Could the princesses have been drawn to his quarters? It seemed unlikely. There were dozens of other warm spaces on the station, but something about the idea nagged at him. The timing was right. The ventilation system connected the royal quarters to the human section, and young Velrani had an incredibly sensitive ability to detect temperature gradients. Danny changed direction, heading toward his own cabin. He passed other search teams, all looking tired and frustrated. A group of Velrani soldiers were using some kind of scanner to check inside the walls. They barely glanced at him as he passed. His quarters were in the junior officers section, a modest corridor with 10 small cabins. Most of his neighbors were out searching. The hallway was quiet, except for the ever-present hum of the station's systems. Danny's door slid open at his approach. He had left the lights on low, and the cabin felt warm and comfortable after hours of walking through cooler corridors. Everything looked normal at first. His desk was cluttered with tablets and books about Velrani culture. His small bathroom was empty. His storage locker was closed and undisturbed. Then he looked at his bed. The blankets were wrong. He was meticulous about making his bed, a habit from his military training. But now the thermal blanket was bunched up in the center of the mattress, forming a lumpy nest that definitely wasn't how he had left it. Danny's heart started beating faster. He approached slowly, not wanting to make any sudden movements. The bundle of blankets seemed to be moving slightly, rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. Breathing. With careful hands, Danny pulled back the edge of the blanket. 3 pairs of compound eyes blinked up at him in the dim light. The Velrani princesses were curled together in a tight spiral, their small bodies fitting perfectly into the warm nest they had created. Their translucent wings were folded carefully against their backs, and their antennae were tucked down in the resting position. They looked at Danny without fear. Kira, the eldest, made a soft chirping sound. Messa and Talus pressed closer to their sister, but didn't try to run. They were comfortable. They were safe. They had found exactly what they needed. Danny's mind raced. This was either the best possible outcome or the worst. The princesses were alive and unharmed. But they were in his bed, in his quarters, and there was no way to explain this that wouldn't look suspicious to Vexthal and the other guards. He needed to think carefully. If he raised the alarm, and Velrani soldiers came storming in, the princesses might panic. If they hurt themselves trying to escape, or if the guards misinterpreted the situation, everything could go catastrophically wrong. But if he waited, if he tried to handle this himself, it might look like he was trying to hide something. Danny made his decision. He slowly backed away from the bed, keeping his movements gentle and non-threatening. He pulled out his communicator and set it to silent mode, typing out a message to Captain Morgan. "Sound the princesses. They are safe and unharmed. They are in my quarters, sleeping. Need diplomatic team here immediately. Do not send guards. Do not make loud noises. They are calm, and I want to keep them that way." He hit send and waited. The seconds felt like hours. The princesses watched him with their multifaceted eyes, but they didn't move from their warm nest. He could see them more clearly now. Their exoskeletons were still soft, showing the pale tissue underneath. They were barely bigger than house cats, small and vulnerable. His communicator vibrated with a response. Acknowledged. Captain Morgan, Diplomat Carson, and Medical Officer Phillips coming to your location. ETA 3 minutes. Maintain current situation. Then another message, This one from Paul Carson. Do not let them leave. Do not let anyone else in. We are handling the Queen. Danny sent back a simple acknowledgement. Then he pulled his desk chair close to the bed and sat down, keeping himself visible to the princesses but not crowding them. He wanted them to know he was there, but not threatening. Kira tilted her head, studying him. Then she made a soft clicking sound, different from the one before. Danny had heard that sound in his language recordings. It was a question. A curious, friendly question. It's okay, he said softly in Velrani. You are safe here. Your mother is looking for you. The mention of their mother made all three princesses' antennae twitch. Talus, the youngest, made a worried chirping sound. They knew they had done something wrong. They knew adults would be upset. No one is angry, Danny lied gently. Everyone was just worried. We wanted to make sure you were safe. The door chimed softly. Danny stood and checked the screen. Captain Morgan, Paul Carson, and Kate Phillips were outside, along with a very nervous-looking junior officer named Chris Baker, who had apparently been recruited as a witness. Danny opened the door just wide enough to let them slip inside, then closed it quickly behind them. All four humans froze when they saw the bed. Kate whispered, then caught herself. Captain Morgan's expression was unreadable, but Danny knew her well enough to see the relief in her eyes. Paul Carson looked like he was already calculating the political implications. How? Captain Morgan asked quietly. Danny explained his theory about the environmental controls and the ventilation system. As he spoke, he pulled up the station schematics on his tablet, showing the path the princesses could have taken from the royal quarters to his cabin. They would have followed the warmth gradient, he finished. My quarters are set to nearly match Velrani comfort levels. To them, it would have felt like home. Kate was scanning the princesses with her medical equipment, being as quiet as possible. They're perfectly healthy, she reported. Heart rate's normal, temperature good, no signs of stress or injury. They're just sleeping. Paul Carson ran a hand through his gray hair. We need to contact Queen Thesara. This needs to be handled very, very carefully. Agreed, Captain Morgan said. She looked at Danny. You stay here with them. Kate, you stay too. Paul and I will speak with the Queen. Chris, you're our witness that we found them exactly as Danny described. Chris nodded nervously. He was young, maybe 22, and this was probably his first real diplomatic crisis. One more thing, Danny said. When the Queen comes, it should be just her, maybe one advisor. If soldiers come in armored and aggressive, these children will panic. Captain Morgan considered this. I'll suggest it. But Danny, you understand the risk you're taking, right? If this goes wrong, if anyone thinks you had anything to do with this beyond being in the right place at the wrong time. I understand, Danny said. But look at them. They're children who got scared and found a safe place to hide. That's all this is. The captain nodded and left with Paul and Chris. Kate stayed behind, setting up her medical equipment quietly in the corner. The princesses watched all of this with sleepy curiosity, but they didn't leave their warm nest. Danny sat back down in his chair. Now came the hard part, waiting to see if Queen Thesara would believe the truth. The wait felt endless. Danny sat in his chair, watching the princesses sleep, while Kate Phillips stood quietly by the door, her medical scanner still in hand. Neither of them spoke. The silence in the small cabin was broken only by the soft breathing of the three Velrani children and the distant hum of the station's systems. Danny's mind was racing through every possible outcome. Best case scenario, Queen Thesara would understand and appreciate that her daughters were safe. Worst case, she would see this as some kind of kidnapping attempt, and the fragile alliance between humans and Velrani would shatter right here in his modest quarters. His communicator buzzed silently. A message from Captain Morgan appeared on the screen. Queen Thesara is coming to your location. She insisted on coming alone. Commander Vexthal objected, but she overruled him. ETA, 2 minutes. Be ready." Danny took a deep breath. Kate caught his eye and gave him a small nod of encouragement. She had moved her medical equipment to make the small cabin as open as possible, removing anything that might seem threatening or suspicious. The princesses stirred slightly. Messa lifted her head, her antennae twitching as if sensing something in the air. Danny wondered if she could detect her mother approaching. The Velrani had senses humans barely understood, chemical and electromagnetic perceptions that went far beyond human capabilities. The door chimed. Danny stood slowly, checking the screen. Queen Thessera stood outside, alone as promised. Her posture was rigid, controlled, but Danny could see the tension in every line of her powerful body. He opened the door. The Velrani queen had to duck slightly to enter his cabin, and once inside, the space felt impossibly small. She was magnificent and terrifying all at once, her purple-black exoskeleton gleaming in the soft light, her compound eyes taking in every detail of the room in a single sweep. Then she saw her daughters. The change in Queen Thessera was immediate and dramatic. Her rigid posture softened. Her antennae, which had been straight and tense, curved forward in what Danny had learned was an expression of relief and tenderness. She made a sound deep in her thorax, a thrumming vibration that Danny had never heard before. The princesses responded instantly. All three lifted their heads, their antennae straightening. "Mother!" they chirped in Velrani, scrambling out of the blankets. But Queen Thessera raised one clawed hand, and the princesses froze. She spoke to them in rapid Velrani, too fast for Danny to follow, but the tone was clear enough. She was asking if they were hurt, if they were afraid. What had happened? The princesses answered in overlapping voices, clicking and chirping over each other. Kira seemed to be doing most of the explaining, while Messa and Talus added details. Danny caught fragments, warm wind path, and too many people, and safe human nest. Queen Thessera listened to everything her daughters had to say. Then she carefully examined each of them, running her antenna over their small bodies, checking for injuries with a delicate touch that seemed impossible from such a large and powerful being. Only when she was satisfied that they were truly unharmed did she turn her attention to Danny. "Lieutenant Commander Wright," she said, her harmonic voice carefully controlled. "My daughters tell me they entered your quarters through the ventilation system. They say they were drawn here by warmth and darkness. They say you found them sleeping and did not disturb them." "That's correct, Your Majesty. I returned to my quarters and discovered them here. I immediately contacted Captain Morgan rather than wake them myself. I thought it would be safer to let you wake them." The Queen's compound eyes studied him for a long moment. Then she looked around the cabin, really seeing it for the first time. Her antenna moved slowly, sampling the air. She walked to his desk and examined the tablets and books there. Danny watched nervously as she picked up one of his language learning guides, a basic Velrani children's primer. "You have been studying our language," she observed. "Yes, Your Majesty, for several months now." She picked up another tablet, this one showing notes about Velrani social structures and family dynamics. Then she noticed the environmental control panel by his bed. She walked over to it and studied the settings. "You have adjusted your living environment," she said. It wasn't a question, but Danny answered anyway. "I wanted to better understand how environmental factors affect Velrani culture and behavior. I thought experiencing your preferred conditions myself might give me better insight." Queen Thessera turned to look at him again. One of her mandibles moved in a way Danny had learned might indicate thoughtfulness or curiosity. "How long have your quarters been set to these conditions?" "About 3 weeks, Your Majesty, since we arrived at the station." "And you did this to study my people?" "Yes, Your Majesty. I believe that true understanding comes from more than just reading about a culture. I wanted to experience a small part of what the Velrani experience every day." The queen made that clicking sound that meant she was thinking carefully. She walked back to the bed, where her daughters sat watching nervously. She spoke to them again in Velrani, asking another question. Kira answered, gesturing with her small claws toward Danny, then toward the blankets, then making a complicated motion that Danny didn't understand. Queen Thesara's antennae straightened in what looked like surprise. She turned back to Danny. My eldest daughter says your quarters smell of learning scent. Do you know what that means? Danny shook his head. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. That's not a term I've encountered in my studies. It is not in your books because it is something we rarely discuss with other species, the Queen explained. The Velrani can detect certain chemical markers that indicate intellectual curiosity and genuine interest in knowledge. Kira says you carry this scent strongly. She also says you emit what they call friend vibrations. I'm honored, Your Majesty, though I don't fully understand what that means. It means my daughters, who have been taught since birth to be cautious of other species, recognized you as safe. Not just non-threatening, but actively safe. Someone who meant them well. The Queen paused. They are rarely wrong about such things. Kate Phillips, who had been standing quietly by the door, finally spoke up. Your Majesty, if I may. I performed a medical scan when we found the princesses. They show no signs of stress or fear. Their heart rates and body temperature suggest they were sleeping peacefully, not hiding in terror. Queen Thesara nodded slowly. Because they found a place that felt like home. Warmth, darkness, quiet. The scent of genuine curiosity rather than fear or disgust. To them, this was a safe haven. She looked directly at Danny. You created this haven, without knowing they would need it. I just wanted to understand your people, Your Majesty. And in doing so, you saved my daughters from what could have been a tragedy. If they had hidden in a cold section, or in an area with poor air circulation, or in any number of dangerous places. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The door chimed again. Queen Thesara's posture immediately went rigid and defensive. Danny checked the screen and saw Commander Vexthal outside, with 2 other Velrani guards. Your Majesty, Vexthal's voice came through the door speaker. We must ensure the princesses are safe and unharmed. The Queen made an annoyed clicking sound. She spoke into her own communicator in rapid Velrani, and Danny caught enough to understand she was ordering them to wait outside. There was a brief argument, but the Queen's tone made it clear this was not a discussion. She turned back to Danny and Kate. Commander Vexthal means well, but he sees threats everywhere. It is his job, but it can be tiresome. She gestured to her daughters. Come, little ones, we must return to our quarters. You have caused much worry. The princesses climbed down from the bed reluctantly. Talus, the youngest, made a sad chirping sound and looked back at the warm nest of blankets. Can we come back? Kira asked in Velrani, and Danny was surprised he understood the simple question. Queen Thesara's antennae moved in a pattern Danny was learning to recognize as amusement. We shall see, she said. Then she looked at Danny. Lieutenant Commander Wright, you will accompany us to the conference room. We have much to discuss, and I believe the situation requires your presence. It wasn't a request. Danny nodded, and followed the Queen and her daughters out into the corridor. Commander Vexthal and his guards immediately surrounded them, forming a protective barrier. The commander's compound eyes fixed on Danny with clear suspicion. Commander, Queen Thesara said sharply, Lieutenant Commander Wright is to be treated as an honored guest, not a suspect. Is that clear? Vexthal's mandibles clicked in obvious displeasure, but he nodded. As you command, Your Majesty. They walked through the station corridors, and Danny could see other crew members watching from doorways and intersections. Word had clearly spread that the princesses had been found. Human and Velrani alike watched the unusual procession. the queen, her 3 daughters, her guards, and 1 human officer. As they walked, Kira kept glancing back at Danny. Finally, she tugged on her mother's arm and chirped something. The queen listened, then made a decision. "Lieutenant Commander Wright," she said, "my daughter wishes to know if you will teach her more about humans, as you have learned about Velrani." Danny looked down at the small princess, who was watching him with her compound eyes full of curiosity. "I would be honored, Your Majesty, though I'm not sure when that would be appropriate." "We will arrange it," the queen said firmly. "After all, if our peoples are to be allies, they must understand each other, and understanding begins with individuals, not governments." They reached the conference room, and Danny could hear raised voices inside. The door opened, and the argument stopped immediately, as everyone saw Queen Thessara and her daughters. Captain Morgan stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we are so relieved to see the princesses safe." "Thanks to Lieutenant Commander Wright," the queen said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear. "He found my daughters sleeping peacefully in his quarters, where they had sought refuge from the stress of yesterday's ceremonies." Commander Vexthal started to say something, but the queen silenced him with a gesture. She was done with suspicion and accusations. Now it was time to explain what had really happened, and to make sure everyone understood that this had been an accident, not an attack. The alliance would survive, but more than that, Danny realized, something new had been born here. Something the political treaties couldn't create on their own. Understanding. Real, genuine understanding between 2 very different species. The conference room fell into complete silence as Queen Thessara entered with her daughters. Every Velrani in the room straightened, their antennae pointing toward their queen in a gesture of respect and attention. The human delegation stood as well, uncertain of what would happen next. Commander Vexthal was the first to speak. "Your Majesty, the princesses require immediate medical examination to ensure they have not been harmed or contaminated." "They have already been examined by the human medical officer," Queen Thessara said calmly. "Kate Phillips performed a complete scan. My daughters are unharmed and healthy. I have also examined them myself. There is no cause for alarm." The commander's mandibles clicked in frustration. "But Your Majesty, we must determine how they came to be in human quarters, and whether this was an intentional act of—" "It was an accident," the queen interrupted firmly. "My daughters became overwhelmed during yesterday's ceremony. They sought quiet and warmth, as juveniles often do when stressed. They entered the ventilation system and followed the environmental gradients until they found suitable shelter." One of the Velrani advisors, an older male with a scarred exoskeleton, stepped forward. "But why human quarters specifically? Why not return to their own chambers, or seek one of the many Velrani spaces on this station?" Queen Thessara's antennae moved in a pattern that Danny was starting to recognize as patience being tested, because Lieutenant Commander Wright had adjusted his environmental controls to match Velrani comfort preferences. To my daughter's senses, his quarters felt more like home than any other space nearby. She gestured to Danny to step forward. He did so, trying to keep his expression neutral despite his nervousness. The Queen continued, "Show them your environmental settings, Lieutenant Commander." Danny pulled out his tablet and displayed the data. The temperature was set 3 degrees higher than human standard. The humidity was increased by 12%. The air circulation was slowed to match Velrani preferences. He had even adjusted the lighting to include more of the spectrum that Velrani eyes could see. Paul Carson studied the data with interest. "You made these changes weeks ago?" "Yes, sir," Danny confirmed. "As part of my cultural study program, I wanted to understand how environmental factors influenced Velrani society and behavior." The Velrani advisor who had spoken earlier examined the data as well. His antenna straightened in what looked like surprise. These settings are very precise. They match juvenile nursery conditions almost exactly. That was unintentional, Danny explained. I was trying to match adult Velrani comfort levels. I didn't realize the overlap with nursery conditions. Queen Thessera made that thrumming sound again, the one Danny had heard earlier in his quarters. And yet, the result was the same. My daughters, frightened and seeking comfort, found a space that reminded them of safety and home. They found a human who smelled of curiosity instead of fear. She turned to address the entire room. My daughters have been raised to be cautious of other species. They are taught from hatching that the universe can be dangerous, that not all beings wish us well. And yet they chose to sleep in a human's bed because their instincts told them he was safe. Commander Vexthal looked deeply uncomfortable. Your Majesty, with respect, juvenile instincts are not always reliable. They could have been in great danger. Could they? The Queen challenged. When Lieutenant Commander Wright found them sleeping in his quarters, what did he do? Did he wake them roughly? Did he call guards to surround them? Did he treat them as trophies or hostages? He contacted Captain Morgan immediately, Kate Phillips said quietly, and he asked that the princesses not be disturbed or frightened. He wanted them to wake up peacefully. The Queen nodded. He showed more care for their well-being than some of our own guards did in the chaos of the search. Her gaze swept across the Velrani military officers. I heard reports of doors being broken down, of weapons being drawn, of accusations being made against our potential allies. The room shifted uncomfortably. Even Commander Vexthal seemed to shrink slightly under the Queen's criticism. Queen Thessara walked to the center of the room, her daughters following close behind her. I have been a queen for 20 cycles, she said, her voice carrying that harmonic quality that made it impossible to ignore. I have negotiated with 17 different species. I have seen alliances form and collapse. And I have learned that the greatest test of any alliance is not what happens when everything goes according to plan. It is what happens when there is crisis and fear and misunderstanding. She turned to look at the human delegation. Captain Morgan, when my daughters vanished, you immediately offered full cooperation. You placed your entire crew under observation. You opened your systems and your quarters to our guards. You did not need to do this, but you did. Captain Morgan inclined her head. We wanted to help find them, Your Majesty. Nothing was more important than their safety. And you, Paul Carson, the Queen continued, looking at the chief diplomat. You remained calm when accusations were being made. You advocated for peaceful resolution, even as my advisors demanded more aggressive action. Paul Carson gave a small smile. Diplomacy is often about patience, Your Majesty, and about giving people the benefit of the doubt. The Queen's antenna moved in acknowledgement. Then she looked directly at Danny. And you, Lieutenant Commander Wright. You have spent months studying my people, not because you were ordered to, but because you were genuinely curious. You altered your own comfort to better understand ours. You learned our language, studied our customs, and when the moment came, you treated my daughters with the same care I would have shown them myself. Danny felt his face heating up under all the attention. I only did what seemed right, Your Majesty. Exactly, the Queen said. You did what seemed right, without hesitation or calculation. That is the mark of true character. She turned to address both delegations. I believe this incident, as frightening as it was, has taught us something valuable. Treaties and trade agreements are important, but they are just words on digital screens. What matters is how our peoples treat each other when everything goes wrong. One of the human officers, a woman named Linda Hayes, raised her hand tentatively. Your Majesty, may I ask a question? The Queen gestured for her to continue. What you said about your daughters being taught to be cautious of other species, but their instincts telling them the lieutenant commander was safe, what exactly did they sense about him? It was the question Danny had been wondering about as well. The Queen's earlier mention of learning scent and friend vibrations had been vague. Queen Thesara considered the question carefully. The Velrani have senses that most species lack. We can detect complex chemical signals, electromagnetic patterns, even subtle vibrations in the air. These senses are especially strong in juveniles, before their conscious minds learn to override instinct with caution. When my daughters entered Lieutenant Commander Wright's quarters, they sensed several things. First, the environmental controls told them this was a safe space, similar to their own home. Second, the chemical markers in the air indicated someone who spent time studying and learning, someone intellectually curious rather than aggressive or fearful. Third, the electromagnetic patterns suggested someone calm and measured, not erratic or dangerous. Hira, the eldest princess, chirped something in Velrani. The queen listened and then translated. My daughter adds that his vibrations felt warm. She cannot explain it better than that in either language, but she says some beings have cold vibrations and some have warm ones. His were warm. Danny didn't know what to say to that. The whole concept was so far outside human understanding that it was difficult to process. Queen Thesara walked over to Danny and studied him with her compound eyes. I have met thousands of individuals from dozens of species, Lieutenant Commander. I have developed some ability to sense these things that my daughters detect instinctively. And I agree with them. You have warm vibrations. You are genuinely curious about others. You seek understanding, not advantage. She turned back to the room. This is the kind of individual we need representing both our peoples. Not just politicians and military officers, though they have their place, but people who actively want to bridge the gap between our cultures. Paul Carson cleared his throat. Your Majesty, are you suggesting a change to the delegation structure? I am suggesting, the Queen said carefully, that Lieutenant Commander Wright be assigned as a permanent cultural liaison between our species. Someone who can help both sides understand the deeper aspects of our cultures, not just the political and economic arrangements. The room erupted in quiet conversation. Commander Vexthal looked stunned. Some of the Velrani advisors seemed pleased, while others looked uncertain. On the human side, Captain Morgan appeared thoughtful, while Paul Carson was already calculating the political implications. Danny felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. A permanent liaison position? That would mean leaving the Horizon's Gate, possibly being stationed on the Velrani homeworld, or at this station. It would be a complete change from his current role. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I'm honored by this suggestion, but I'm just a lieutenant commander. I'm not a trained diplomat or cultural ambassador. No, the Queen agreed, but you are something more valuable. You are genuinely interested in understanding others. You do not simply tolerate differences, you actively seek to comprehend them. That curiosity, that openness, is rarer than you might think. Your Majesty, I would need to consult with Earth Command about such a significant reassignment. Of course, the Queen said. I am not demanding an immediate answer, but I want it understood that this incident has convinced me of something important. The human species possesses a quality that I have rarely seen in other spacefaring races. You actively reach out to understand others, even when it is uncomfortable or difficult. She placed one clawed hand gently on Kira's head. My daughter fell asleep in a stranger's bed, because that stranger had worked to make his environment welcoming to her kind. She felt safe, because he had already demonstrated respect for our species through his actions, not just his words. This is what true alliance looks like. Not agreements and signatures, but individuals caring enough to learn about each other. The Queen's antennae straightened, and her posture shifted back to formal and regal. The treaty will be signed tomorrow, as planned, but I propose an addition. A cultural exchange program with Lieutenant Commander Wright as the initial human representative. Others can join later, but I want him to be the first. My daughters have chosen their teacher, and I believe they chose well." The three princesses chirped in agreement, their antennae all pointing toward Danny. He couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm, even as his mind raced with the implications of what was being proposed. Tomorrow would bring the formal treaty signing, but tonight, something more important had already been decided. The alliance between humans and Valrani would be built on more than politics. It would be built on understanding, on genuine connection between individuals who cared enough to bridge the gap between species. And it had all started because three frightened children found a warm, safe place to sleep. The morning of the treaty signing arrived with clear skies, visible through the massive observation windows of the station. Danny stood in his quarters, adjusting his dress uniform for what felt like the 100th time. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness about the ceremony, but from the weight of what would come after. The previous night had been a blur of meetings and communications. Captain Morgan had immediately contacted Earth Command about Queen Thesara's proposal. The response had come back within 3 hours, which was incredibly fast for bureaucratic decisions. Earth's leadership had approved the cultural liaison position, recognizing the enormous opportunity it represented. Danny was being promoted to commander and reassigned, effective immediately after the treaty signing. Kate Phillips knocked on his door and entered with a smile. "You ready for your big day?" "A week ago I was a junior officer studying alien cultures as a hobby. Now I'm about to become Earth's first official cultural ambassador to the Valrani Empire." Kate checked his uniform with a practiced eye, straightening his collar. "You'll do fine. You've been preparing for this your whole career, even if you didn't know it." She paused. "The princesses are asking for you, by the way. They're with Queen Thesara in the royal quarters, and apparently they won't stop chirping about wanting to see the human who has the warm nest." Danny laughed, despite his nerves. In the past 12 hours, he had learned more about Valrani juvenile behavior than all his previous months of study combined. The princesses were fascinated by him, treating him like a combination of teacher and big friendly pet. It was endearing, and slightly overwhelming all at once. The ceremony was scheduled for mid-morning, in the station's largest chamber, a massive space designed to accommodate gatherings of multiple species. Danny made his way there with Kate, passing through corridors that had been decorated with both human and Valrani symbols. It was a visible sign of the alliance taking shape. The chamber was already filling with people. The human delegation stood on one side, looking sharp in their dress uniforms. The Valrani contingent occupied the other side, their exoskeletons polished to a mirror shine. In the center was a raised platform where the actual signing would take place. Danny found his assigned position with the other junior officers. Captain Morgan gave him a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Paul Carson was already on the platform, reviewing the treaty documents one final time. Everything had to be perfect. Queen Thesara entered with her full entourage. She was magnificent, in ceremonial robes that draped over her exoskeleton, colored in deep purples and golds. Her daughters walked behind her, also dressed in small ceremonial garments. When Kira spotted Danny in the crowd, her antenna perked up, and she made a happy chirping sound that carried across the chamber. Several Valrani turned to look, and Danny felt his face heat up with embarrassment. The ceremony began with formal speeches from both sides. Paul Carson spoke eloquently about human hopes for peaceful cooperation and mutual benefit. The Valrani High Diplomat, an elderly male named Korthax, responded with equally formal words about unity and strength through alliance. Danny tried to pay attention, but his mind kept wandering to what would come next. After the speeches came the actual signing. Queen Thessera and Captain Morgan, representing their respective governments, stepped forward to the platform. The treaty document was displayed on a holographic screen, rotating slowly so everyone could see it. Both leaders placed their marks of approval, Captain Morgan with a traditional signature, and Queen Thessera with a complex chemical stamp that only Valrani could produce. The chamber erupted in polite applause from both sides. It was done. The alliance was official. But Queen Thessera wasn't finished. She raised one clawed hand for silence, and the chamber quieted immediately. "As we have discussed," she said, her voice carrying easily through the space, "this treaty includes a cultural exchange program. The first human representative to this program will be Commander Danny Wright." There was surprised murmuring from the human side. Many of them hadn't been informed of Danny's promotion. Captain Morgan stepped forward and officially presented Danny with his new rank insignia. He accepted them in a daze, still not quite believing this was happening. "Commander Wright," Queen Thessera said formally, "will you accept the position of cultural liaison to the Valrani Empire?" Danny stepped forward, onto the platform. His heart was pounding, but his voice was steady. "I accept, Your Majesty. It is an honor to serve in this capacity." "Then let us begin your education immediately," the Queen said, and there was a note of amusement in her harmonic voice. "My daughters have requested the honor of being your first teachers. They are quite insistent that you need to learn proper Valrani juvenile etiquette." The chamber rippled with what Danny had learned to recognize as Valrani laughter, a clicking and chittering sound. Even Commander Vexthal, who had been so suspicious the day before, seemed to find this amusing. Kira, Messa, and Talus scurried forward onto the platform. They performed a formal Valrani greeting to Danny, touching their antennae to their thoraxes in perfect sequence. Danny responded in kind, getting the gesture right this time. The princesses chirped their approval. "They say you are learning well," Queen Thessera translated. "But you still smell too much of human stress, and not enough of peaceful learning. They wish to show you proper relaxation techniques." "I look forward to the lesson, Your Majesty," Danny said, managing to keep a straight face. The ceremony concluded with a formal reception. Humans and Valrani mingled, sharing traditional foods and drinks from both cultures. Danny found himself surrounded by Valrani officials who wanted to meet the human who had impressed their queen. He answered questions as best he could, trying to be respectful while also being himself. Through it all, the three princesses stayed close by. They had apparently decided that Danny was their responsibility now, and they took this duty seriously. When one particularly aggressive Valrani merchant tried to monopolize Danny's time with questions about human trade goods, Talus actually positioned herself between them and made a warning chirp. The merchant backed off immediately, looking embarrassed. Kate found Danny during a quiet moment and pulled him aside. "You've acquired very protector students," she observed. "They seem to think I need looking after," Danny agreed. "I'm not sure if that's adorable or concerning." "Both, probably," Kate said with a smile. "But seriously, Danny, you're going to do great at this. I've watched you these past months. You don't just study other cultures. You genuinely respect them. That's going to matter a lot in this role." "I hope so," Danny said, "because I'm starting to realize how much I don't know. The Valrani have thousands of years of cultural development, complex social structures, technologies I barely understand. How am I supposed to bridge that gap?" "One day at a time," Kate advised. "One conversation, one lesson, one shared meal. That's how real understanding happens, not through grand gestures, but through consistent effort and genuine care." The reception eventually wound down. The human delegation would be returning to the Horizon's Gate that evening, with most of them heading back to Earth within the week. But Danny would be staying. Queen Thessera had arranged quarters for him in a section of the station that had been modified to accommodate both human and Velrani comfort levels. He would split his time between the station and the Velrani homeworld, learning and teaching in equal measure. As the guests began to depart, Queen Thesara approached Danny with her daughters. "Commander Wright," she said formally, then shifted to a more casual tone. "Or may I call you Danny? I believe we will be working closely together for a long time, and excessive formality can be tiresome." "Danny is fine, Your Majesty," he said. "And you may call me Thesara in private," she said. "Your Majesty is appropriate for ceremonies, but we are building a relationship here, not just following protocols." She guided him toward a quieter corner of the chamber. "I want you to understand what this position truly means. You will be a bridge between our peoples, yes, but you will also be a mirror, reflecting what humans see when they look at Velrani, and what Velrani see when they look at humans. This is not an easy responsibility." "I understand," Danny said. "I am not certain you do." "Not yet," Thesara said kindly. "But you will learn, and my daughters will help. They have decided you are part of their learning group now. In Velrani culture, that is a significant bond. They will teach you our ways, and they will expect you to teach them yours. They will be honest with you, sometimes painfully so, and they will protect you as they would protect each other." Kira chirped something, and Thesara listened before translating. "My daughter says that you need to come see your new quarters. She and her sisters helped design the sleeping area, and they want your approval." Danny blinked. "They helped design my quarters?" "They insisted," Thesara said with clear amusement. "They wanted to make sure you had a proper warm nest, since you seem to appreciate such things. I believe they also included several modifications that they think will make you more comfortable. You may want to prepare yourself." The new quarters were in a section of the station Danny had never visited. They were larger than his previous cabin, with a main living area, a sleeping chamber, a bathroom modified for human use, and what appeared to be a study area filled with Velrani books and learning materials. But the sleeping chamber was what caught his attention. Instead of a standard human bed, there was a raised platform with temperature controls built directly into it. The bedding was a combination of human and Velrani materials, creating a nest-like structure that looked incredibly comfortable. There were even adjustable light panels that could shift through the full spectrum of Velrani vision. The three princesses watched anxiously as Danny examined the room. Nessa chirped a question, and Thesara translated. She wants to know if the nest is acceptable, or if they made it too Velrani. Danny sat down on the platform and felt the warmth immediately adjust to his body temperature. It was like being wrapped in a perfect, gentle hug. "It's wonderful," he said honestly. "Thank you." All three princesses made happy chirping sounds and did a little dance that involved clicking their developing wings together. It was possibly the most adorable thing Danny had ever seen. "They are pleased," Thesara observed. "They take their responsibilities seriously, even at their age." Over the following weeks, Danny settled into his new role. His days were filled with lessons about Velrani history, culture, and social structures. The princesses were his constant companions, teaching him everything from proper formal greetings to the subtle art of antenna reading. They corrected his language mistakes with patient chirps and demonstrated proper Velrani social interactions through elaborate play acting. But it wasn't just one-way learning. Danny taught them about human culture in return. He showed them human music, which they found fascinating but slightly chaotic. He explained human family structures, which were very different from Velrani brooding groups. He taught them human games and stories, and they taught him Velrani songs and histories. Queen Thesara often joined these lessons, observing quietly and sometimes adding her own insights. Danny came to realize that this was as much about her learning about humans as it was about him learning about Velrani. She was genuinely curious about how humans thought, how they formed relationships, how they saw the universe. One evening, about a month after the treaty signing, Danny was in his quarters reviewing the day's lessons, when Thesara came to visit. The princesses were with their tutors, so it was just the two of them. "You have adapted well," she observed, settling onto a platform designed for Velrani anatomy. "My daughters speak of you constantly. You are their favorite subject of conversation." Danny smiled. "They're amazing teachers, patient, enthusiastic, and honest, sometimes to the point of being blunt." "That is the Velrani way," Thesara said. "We value direct communication, even when it is uncomfortable. But I notice you have the same quality. You do not hide behind diplomatic language unless the situation requires it. You say what you mean." "I try to," Danny agreed. "I figure if I'm supposed to bridge cultures, I should be genuine about it." Thesara's antenna moved in that pattern he now recognized as thoughtfulness. "When my daughters disappeared, I was terrified. Not just because they were missing, but because I thought it meant the alliance would fail. I thought it proved that humans and Velrani were too different to truly understand each other." "But then we found them," Danny said. "No," Thesara corrected gently. "You found them, and in doing so, you showed me something I had not fully believed before. You showed me that humans do not merely tolerate difference. Some of you actively embrace it. You changed your environment to understand mine. You studied my culture not because you had to, but because you wanted to. And when you found my daughters, your first thought was their comfort, not your own convenience or safety." She paused, her compound eyes reflecting the soft light. "That is why this alliance will succeed, Danny. Not because of trade agreements or military pacts, but because there are individuals like you who care enough to build real bridges." Danny felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I just hope I can live up to that expectation." "You already are," Thesara said. "Every day, with every lesson you teach and every question you ask, my daughters adore you. My advisors respect you. Even Commander Vexthal, who suspected you of kidnapping, now speaks of you as an example of human integrity." The door chimed, and Kira's voice came through the speaker, chirping excitedly in Velrani. Thesara made an amused clicking sound. "My eldest daughter has escaped from her tutors and wishes to share an exciting discovery about human music theory. Shall I send her in?" "Of course," Danny said. As Kira scurried into the room, already chattering about something she had learned, Danny realized that his life had transformed completely. He was no longer just a junior officer studying alien cultures from a distance. He was living among the Velrani, learning from them, teaching them, building relationships that would shape the future of human-Velrani cooperation. And it had all started because 3 frightened children found a warm place to sleep, and a human who had prepared that place without even knowing they would need it. Sometimes, Danny thought, the most important bridges are built without planning, created simply by caring enough to try to understand. The galaxy was vast and often frightening, but it was also full of possibilities for connection, for understanding, for friendship that crossed the boundaries of species and culture. Danny had found his purpose in building those connections, and judging by the enthusiastic chirping as Kira demonstrated her newest discovery, the Velrani had found something valuable too. A human who saw them not as aliens to be tolerated, but as people to be understood and appreciated. The future, Danny thought as he listened to Kira's excited explanation, was going to be interesting, and he couldn't wait to see what came next.